Thank you very much, Anka, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for us, for Hans Lohmann and myself, to present this topic, Miletos and the Milesia, 7 millennia of landscape change. It was indeed Hans Lohmann who brought me to Miletos, because we had worked together in Attica first, and then he came to Miletos because Bochum von Greve came to Miletos, and this is when he introduced me to Miletos. And I'm really grateful, Hans, that you supported myself and my team, especially also Mark Müllenhoff. Hans was the second supervisor of Mark Müllenhoff's PhD. So this is really a very friendly relationship. And also with his team, we had very, very good times in Miletos. Okay, let's put our things together now. And so I will, after an introduction, which is a little bit a repetition of what I did last time, because this is a video now of its own, the spatio-temporal evolution of the Büyük Mender Delta, then the Milesian Peninsula and the siltation of the harbors. Then Hans will talk about the survey on the peninsula of Miletos, an update, and depending on the time, I may finish with an epilogue. First, I want to introduce you in 2 slides to the Anthropocene, because I think the archaeology can contribute here considerably and has not yet done so. Anthropocene, we say, is the geological era in which humans have become one of the most important factors influencing many ecosystems, the geological, the biological, and atmospheric processes on Earth, and influence them so much that they cannot go back. It is irreversible. So many ecosystems have been irreversibly altered by humans. We call this the human footprint also. The question is, when do we say the Anthropocene starts? This is very different in the discussion. Some say it starts with the Neolithic, because this is when humans settled and arable farming started. Yeah, others say, well, at that time, farming was still quite ecologically adept. That was not a problem for the environment. It could always go back in the original state. Others say, and this may be a chance for archaeology, it's the use of the iron plow, because the iron plow, other than just a stick, which was the planters in New Guinea still today do their farming, the iron plow really tears up the soil. And this is when soil erosion comes into the picture. This is when the soils are eroding and degrading and so on. And I think this is indeed where archaeology can contribute from that time on. And then others say, no, it's much later. It's the invention of the steam engine. So that would be the beginning of the industrial period with James Watt, the steam engine and electricity and so on. And the shortest time is those who say, oh, it's the mass use of plastics. We changed all ecosystems. We are talking about microplastic even in our blood, you know. So this is really when we changed also the ecosystems, and irreversibly. We can discuss that. The term as such was created by Crutzen, Nobel Prize winner Crutzen. He's in Mainz University or Max Planck Institute. And he created this in 2000, and then came, of course, a big discussion. But we think that indeed this Anthropocene, that we have in a geological era where humans are a geological factor, this is indeed a very good concept. And as I say, it's an appeal that archaeology shall contribute here. There is indeed an exhibition. It's in Baden-Württemberg and in the Rosenstein Castle. This is near Stuttgart. And the topic is, it is just on now until the middle of next year, Anthropocene, age, turning point, future, question mark. So the human footprint in space and time. And here you see the minister, the president of Baden-Württemberg being introduced to this exhibition. So if you find time, go there. We define geoarchaeology as follows: the study of geo-bioarchives in an archaeological context with the tools of geosciences. in order to reconstruct the evolution and the use of former landscapes, as well as their resources and ecosystems, with especially addressing the human-environment interactions. So from the definition as such, you see that it is a very, interdisciplinary science par excellence, you can say. It combines objects and objectives, perspectives and methods of, on the one hand side, the natural sciences, of course, the geosciences, geology, sedimentology, mineralogy, paleontology, and so on, physical geography, geomorphology, soil science, geoecology, biogeography, biology with palynology, archaeozoology, ancient DNA, and so on. It combines natural sciences with the humanities, archaeological sciences, classical, prehistory, and so on, historical sciences, oriental studies, and so on, and anthropogeography also, urban geography, geography of rural areas, historical geography, and so on. So it's really interdisciplinary, and this is the charm of it. So I introduced you to this. I will not go into detail, but I want to have it in the video. The geoarchaeological research design, on the one hand side, in the upper topic left, you see the bioarchives, geobioarchives, like river terraces and deltas and lakes and so on, alluvial fans, subcars, for instance, less paleosoil sequences, dolines, and so on. And on the other hand side, archaeological and historical sources like settlements and harbors, fortresses, and so on, cultural places, cemeteries, and so on. Yeah. And then, of course, we both do field work, and we take all kinds of cartography and now satellite images and so on. And then we interpret it. You interpret the written sources, and we do our lab work and so on. Important for both of us is dating. You know, datings, how old is it? You know best from archaeology and the artifacts, ceramics, and so on. And we know with radiocarbon or luminescence methods and so on, and dendrochronology if possible. And then finally, it merges together. This is the important thing, that we come together, we discuss it together, and the final outcome is the reconstruction of the paleogeography, or also of the networks of settlements and the cultural situations. And in the end, wonderful would be a visualization if we did a film about it, you know, where everything now merges together. That would be the final outcome. Wonderful. And it would also be a service to society, because then you can show it in museums or to the students. Then so to speak, the landscape in its spatio-temporal evolution becomes alive. The methods of geoarchaeology. Well, we take maps, we satellite images, we do our drones, we fly the drones, and we do differential GPS in order to also know about the altitude, which we need at the coast, you know, the former sea level changes. And then in the middle part, you see us drilling here. And this is more or less the tool which we have, where we are strong, because we can go into archives like this harbor here of Elaya, which is difficult for archaeologists to excavate, because you see the groundwater table is high. We are in the mud, so to speak, and that's difficult then for archaeology to excavate. And then we take the sediment, and this is what I always say, this is the book we are reading. This is our book. And we look at the macrofauna, the microfauna, and the pollen record, and we do some chemistry analysis. Then, of course, we work together with the geophysicists, and you see the geoelectric data here and our drillings. And then when we combine it, we have a good information of the subsurface strata. And then, of course, comes the archaeology, the excavation, and also the ancient history. You tell us about the buildings and how old they are and how they were constructed. And then come the pottery, and you tell us how old it is. And we have the ancient sources like Strabon being a very important source. And we need your help there, because we know whether Strabon was in Miletos or not, or whether he has the accounts from someone else. If he was there, we know that he's a good observer, so we can trust on him. But if he was not there, or if he was on other sites, then he is as good as the second source from which he takes the information. And finally, if everything merges together, then we have the landscape scenario as you see it here for Troy, yeah, the evolution of the delta of the Kara-Menderes, yeah, and the evolution of the Simos, the Demric here, yeah. The Scamander, the ancient Scamander, which we know from the Iliad. Yeah, so this is an interpretation where everything came together. Yeah, another picture is this one with a drill core, which is 16 meters. So it starts here. The man is drilling from the surface here, which would be to the left here. And then if you go down, you're at 16 meters. And then we interpret the different strata, which we see here. We do interpret from the macrofauna, the microfauna. We do the dating with radiocarbon or with an artifact which we find. And if it is diagnostic, if you can date it, then it helps support the evidence which we have from radiocarbon dating. And for my research group, this is a very important tool to go into the microfauna, especially into the what we call the ostracods. These are very little animals, this is 1 millimeter, what you see to the left. Every size of a valve or every test is maximum 1 millimeter, very, very tiny, but very indicative. Because there are some who are can only live in a totally saline environment of the sea, others in a lagoon, they can adapt to a lagoon. There are even some who go to this fresh water. So that's really interesting. And you would say, when you look, for instance, at this, the lower right one, you see that all the spikes are still there. So definitely this valve or this test of this ostracod was not redeposited. Otherwise it would have been abraded and you wouldn't see them so nicely. So from that, you can also say, it was not redeposited. And you can say from the sieve pores, as you see here, for instance, the upper left, yeah, it has what we call sieve pores here, pores. From the shape of the pores, you can tell the salinity because they are much more elongated if it is a saline, saline environment, like in the sea, or they are more rounded if you go to a lagoon or even freshwater, going into a freshwater lagoon. We have one ostracod, Cyprides torosa, which can adapt to all these environments, but the sieve pores, they change depending on the salinity. So this gives us even an information on the paleosalinity. And there are very specific associations of foraminifera and of ostracods, as you see in the right part of the slide, whether we are in the fully marine, in the littoral environment, or whether we are in a lagoon, in the intertidal, and so on. So from that association, we can tell very well in which environment we are, and we can reconstruct the paleo environments. We work together with geophysicists. This is, for instance, this was done by Hecht from Heidelberg. You see here a geoelectric profile, and this is the profile to the right. And of course, now we can drill at the specific sites which are interesting. This, for instance, this blue stuff, what is it we could drill directly here? Or what is the uppermost part here? What happens here? So this helps us a lot. First, it is always good to first have geophysics, either geoelectric, geomagnetic, or georadar. And after that, then do the drilling. And then if it is very important, do excavation. But excavation, it's the crown, it's the best. But of course, it is very costly, time consuming. And if the groundwater table is high, it's very difficult. For instance, in the lower left part, this is what Stümpel did from Kiel. And you see directly, everybody sees this is very, it has a lot of shadows and a lot of objects, obviously. And this is very smooth, So indeed, here is the wall, the city wall of Miletos. And here it was the former sea even. So this is why it is so calm. And here was the city. This is why it is so vivid. So from that you could, and we did drill, of course, then we would compare. We drilled to the left in the sea. Yes, we could confirm. Here we are in the city. Yes, we found a lot of ceramics and stuff. And here we drilled on the wall, on the ancient wall. We did not find the city wall as such, but we found, so to speak, the geometry from where it was taken. So we could confirm, yes, it was there, but people then took the stones for other purposes. And later Van Greve, he excavated here in one part, and he could confirm it also. So that's very nice. First geophysics, then some drillings, and then if possible, doing some excavations. And here even they are very advanced, that they can even in the sea, in the water, they can do some geomagnetic measurements, like here in the Sea of Azov. Now we come to Turkey, and we come to the Anatolian Plate. And I told you already last time, it's important to know about the geo setting, the tectonic setting. And we know that the Anatolian Plate gets stress here in the eastern part. This is why we have the volcano, Mount Ararat, 5,100 meters high, because there is the stress finally from the African to the Eurasian plate, in this case with the Arabian plate. So here is stress, volcanism, and here is accommodation space. And this is why we have the grabens here and the horsts. And in the grabens, we have the rivers, the Büyük Mender, the Küçük Mender, the Gedis River, and in the northern part, we have the Karamenderes or the Scamander. Yeah, so there is space because there is a little subduction and a lot of space, and this is why it fingers out. Yeah, it fingers out, and in between are the grabens, and there we have the rivers. And then we always have to think, where do we come from? We come from a low sea level. The sea level was in the last maximum of the last ice age, 20,000 years ago. It was minus 120 meters. So the world looked really different. Part of the Adriatic Sea was dry, and Odessa Shelf, the Sea of Azov did not exist. And the Sirte here was dry. You could not walk over, but it was closer, of course. But it was never dry, the Straits of Gibraltar. This was never, because this is 240 meters. So it's always a water exchange here. So anyway, but the Black Sea was cut off because the sill in the Bosporus is only 40 meters. So, and then sea level comes up, comes high, and this sea level rise, yeah, from about, let's say, 15,000 to about 7,000. This is very rapid, very rapid. So a lot of land is drowning. The earth changes its shape, its face, so to speak. This is what I think is the background of the Atlantis saga, because humans everywhere, the Neolithic hunters, or the Mesolithic better to say, the Mesolithic and the Paleolithic hunters, they would know, the sea is coming everywhere, so we are drowning. I think this is the background in the collective memory of humankind. This is the background of the Atlantis saga. And then about 7,000 meters, still sea level is rising, but slowly, slowly. And this is from that time on, 7,000 before today, this is when the deltas evolve. This is when the rivers now with their sediment load, then they have more sediment load because of Neolithic time. People are, there is deforestation and so on, not so much at the beginning, but anyhow, now the rivers can put out their deltas, not before. Also 10,000 years ago, deltas evolved, but they are all drowned. The deltas you see are 7,000 years old. The Mississippi Delta, the Ebro Delta, maximum 7,000 years. So also for the delta we are talking about. And I talked about the life cycle of islands. This is for me the transgression, the rapid transgression. So a Ria coast evolves. It's a transgression, a big embayment, many embayments, marine bays evolve. This is the birth of the island, because with the embayment also islands now are born. Because before Samos, for instance, was attached to the mainland, but now it becomes an island because sea level rises so high. So many islands, and then this is the birth of the island, and the death of the island is the progradation of the delta. When the delta, the river delta, land blocks the island. This is a nice expression in English, land blocking of the islands. And I will show you this as an example. Now we go to Miletos. Last time we were in Ephesus. Now we go just one river valley, the Büyük Mender, we go down to Miletos. And this is the nice view from the theater, which was renovated in the 1st, 2nd century AD. And you look over this plain, all of the plain which you see there with the fields, this was once water. And in the back you see the island of Lade. It was an island. land now, of course, totally landlocked. There was even a battle in 494. The Persians were winning there, this naval battle. There was a naval battle, and now it is totally landlocked. Yeah. When we are talking about, first I want to give credit to those who have supported our work. This is the universities of Bochum and now Hamburg and the DAI, and especially to Hans Lohmann, I said this already, also Volkmar von Greve, Christoph Bernds now, and of course my co-workers, Mark Mühlenhoff mainly, and also Alexander Herder. They helped all interpretation here. It's not just my stuff, but it is an ensemble of all of us. Yeah, and when you look at the sediments and why could the delta prograde so massively, then you have to see where do the sediments come from. The sediments come from easily erodible, in this case, easily erodible Paleozoic sediments, Paleozoic schists. This is this stuff here, what you see, schiefer here, Paleozoic. It's so deeply weathered, and it is schist, it is a lot of mica in it. And in all of our drills, when we have the sediments in our hand, it's so micaceous, it shines in the sun, you know. So this comes from the deeply weathered schists from the Paleozoic, but also the Neogene, as we call it. So the tertiary sediments here, they are also easily erodible. This is another contributor to all the sediments which are here. And you have to bear in mind that the Büyük Mender, the Maiandros, is one of the biggest river in Turkey. Not the biggest is the Kızılırmak, but this is one of the biggest, which goes far back. So it has a lot of drainage basin, and this is the sink. So the erosion is in the drainage basin, of course, but this is the sink. The sink is, of course, the alluvial plain and the delta. This is the sink of the sediments, and finally also the sea. The fine grains, very fine grain stuff goes out in the sea. As I said, this is the transgression, and now comes the islands that they are landlocked. And I will put this as an example, Myos and Hybanda. And when you look at this, this is the landscape. This is Hybanda today in the back, but we know this nice narration of Plinius. He talks about Hybanda as a former island. He says in his Naturalis Historia, again, nature, has taken islands away from the sea and joined them to the land. And he enumerates some, and then he says, Hybanda, once an Ionian island, is now 200 stadia distant from the sea. So he knows this was once an island, and the distance he gives is too far, because in his time it was not so much, it was half of it. But anyhow, it is a good observation. Yes, this was once an island. And if you look at the landscape as it is today with Myos, and then I show you how it was 1,500 years ago, there was Hybanda, an island, 1,500 before Christ, and Myos was a peninsula sticking out into the Gulf. And we drilled all around this Myosian peninsula, if you like, and sometimes we hit the bedrock, and then we have transgression sediments and shallow marine, and then the cultural layers, and finally, of course, the alluvium from the river, from the Maiandros River. And we have a nice narration from Pausanias, and he says about the people of Myos, they left their city on account of the following accident. A small inlet of the sea used to run into their land. This inlet, the river Meander, turned into a lake by blocking up the entrance with mud, sediment, silt. When the water, ceasing to be sea, became fresh, gnats, mosquitoes, in vast swarms bred in the lake, so it was fresh water, until the inhabitants were forced to leave the city. They departed for Miletos, taking with them the images of the gods and their other movables. And when I was there, there was only the temple of Dionysos, or part of it was left, he continues. So this is a very good observation. He observes, yes, the Meander is responsible. It cut off a freshwater lake, then you have the mosquitoes all over, and the people had to go, they had to leave. So that's very nice, we can confirm it, and we have a good account by Pausanias. And this is about the scenario, you know, this is Myos, and there is still a little lake is still left. This is Azap Gölü. It's an interesting lake because colleagues, not us, unfortunately, but colleagues found Santorini ash in it. That's really, really nice. And this is about the time, how it looked like in Pausanias' time. There is Praini, there is Myos, and he says, my reasoning is confirmed by the fact that the meander has turned in a short time the sea between Praini and Myos into solid land. Yes, between the both is solid land these times, yeah. And we look at Miletos now, the Milesian Peninsula. Let's have a short look. Here it is. This is the wonderful view from the German excavation house. This is really an excellent setting as the best excavation house from the view I know. So in the background, you have Praini, you have Myos to the right, so to speak, and then you look on the ruin of Miletos, this nice theater, and on top the Byzantine castle. And all of the plain you see in the back, the plain, the alluvial plain of the Maiandros and the affluents, this was once sea. This is how it looks today if we look at it, and this is what it looks 2500 before Christ. You had an archipelago, many islands. How do we know? Well, now comes the history. I don't want to go too much into details, but it starts about the late Chalcolithic period. This is the first settlement phase, Miletos I, and we have to give tribute to Partzinger because he was the one who first discovered late Chalcolithic at the Bouleuterion. And this is about 3,500, 3,000 before Christ. So Miletos I was found there, later at different spots, but this is due to the first discovery of Partzinger. And then the other epochs, they are Sensu-Niemeyer. Then comes the early Bronze Age Miletos and the Minoan Mycenaean Miletos. The proto-geometric Miletos. I don't want to go too much now into detail. This would take too long. And then the archaic Miletos, 7th, 6th century BC. This is the important one because this is the most prospering period with Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes. This is when Miletos is founding 80 colonies in the Black Sea region and in the Marmara Sea region. So this is really, it's the ornament of Ionia, as Herodotus tells us. So this is really important. And then comes the naval battle of Lade, 494 BC, the victory of the Persians, the total defeat, the destruction of the city. And whenever an excavator is excavating something deep enough, we always ask, do you see the Persian destruction, the destruction of the Persians? Yeah, here it is. Okay. And then comes the classical Hellenistic Miletos. Very soon after, actually, they recovered, and then classical Hellenistic in the Hippodamian grid, as we say. And then comes the Roman Miletos. But at that time, Roman time, of course, Ephesus is more important. Ephesus is then the capital of the province of Asia. And the Byzantine Militias, there was a new flourishing period, if you like. It's an episcopal see at that time, the erection of the castle on top of the theater. And then comes the Islamic Miletos, but it's more and more a decline also because of the siltation of the harbors. If you lose the harbor as a harbor city, then it's finished. You have to go somewhere else. And this is normally what was in the textbooks of history. This famous Milesian peninsula, the Greco-Roman Miletos, and we discovered that indeed it was islands. It was at least 5 islands, as we can see. The big island, Humetepe Island, a big one. There was never totally 2 islands. No, it was further. The Lion Harbor was further here to the south, and also from this a little bit more, but it was never totally 2 islands. And then, so we have one big island, we have the other one, Athena Temple Island, we can call it. We have a little one, Heroon 2 Island, and then we have these 2 indeed, and I show you a picture soon because they are often forgotten, these 2, but they were also there. And this is a view on these 2. Because we are standing here now on Humetepe, we are looking over what we call the harbor. You will see this in a minute. And we look at this one and this one. They are called, I have it here, Büyük and Küçük Çakmaklık, and probably it is in literature Dromiskos and Perne in antiquity. We talk about it in an article which I can give you. So probably this is the harbor. Most probably this is the harbor. We are pretty sure. And here we have two islands which are still visible today. If you look closely, there is a settlement or a homestead, a farmstead on top of it, and here also, yeah. And the meander runs between the two. It is really a nice setting, a very nice setting. The meander runs now between us, where we are standing, and the two. So if you want to go there, you would have to cross the meander. And I want to show you with this slide, I'm sorry, I didn't find the colored one, but this is from the publication 2006 at the Athena temple where Niemeyer was excavating. So we drilled down there, and I just want to see you what we can do with our methods. We find out this is now between the Temple of Athena and the Heroon 2. So we have the transgression. So the sea is, so to speak, arriving. Shallow marine. So definitely it was marine between Temple of Athena and Heroon 2. And then littoral. And in the littoral, we already find cultural debris, often then rolled ceramics, and then alluvial sediments on top of it. And from that, we can reconstruct the maximum shoreline, as you can see here. Here we are in the Temple of Athena, and we did some drills. And I want to show you this 231 drill, this one, and this is this one here. Unfortunately not colored now, but anyhow, one is the bedrock. So we come to the limestone. This is the bedrock. Then comes two, the transgression. The sea is arriving, and the transgression has pebbles in it. They are from Miletos 1. Late Chalcolithic pebbles. You see the pebbles, but it's still detectable that it is Miletos 1. Then we have shallow marine, a little bit with rounded ceramics. Of course, there is wave action and the ceramics are rounded. And then we have on top of it, finally, we have number 7. Yeah, you see even here, this is massive, yeah, quite massive. This is a wall, late Bronze Age wall. This is Miletos 4. So definitely we have a marine phase here between Miletos 1 and Miletos 4. So during Miletos 2 and 3, we have some wave action. So it is very close that we have the maximum shoreline. If we go further to the south here, we have bedrock and never the sea in this environment. And now we have a look at the Lion Harbor. We have Strabo's account, first half of the first century AD. The present city has 4 harbors, one of which is large enough to host a fleet, he tells us. And yeah, this is Lion Harbor, no doubt, the Theatre Harbor. Then we think the Humetepet Harbor, I will talk about it in a minute. And then maybe here an Eastern Harbor, which would be nice because there is the market here, but it may of course also have been silted up already, or another harbor here. We are not totally sure about the fourth harbor. And the Lion Harbor is closable. So this is for the fleet, yeah? So you could close it here. So that's so that can only be the Lion Harbor. And we have a look at it. Yeah, we drilled there. This is a famous lion, which was excavated. Now it's still there. We did not, or Van Greve did not transport it to the museum because he says the danger is too much that it breaks into 2 parts. Let's leave it because the other lion is broken. So that it's covered again. And only those who know where it is can find at least part of the head, the uppermost part of the head. And I drilled just in the middle there between the lions. And this is the classic drill, which is the bedrock, in this case, the debris and the transgression of the sea, then shallow marine and marine sediments, and then comes more and more lagoonal or harbor sediments, and then on top of it, the alluvium. And when we look at the time constraints which we have here, then we can say, yes, we have the maximum siltation in Roman times, much more than the early siltation where the ecosystem is still intact, yeah? The vegetation is still intact and so on, then you don't have much erosion on the slopes. But then in Roman time, we know that there is a strong human footprint in Roman time. So we have the strongest siltation here. But we have to consider the delta is also near, so we also have part of the foreset beds of the delta. And the geophysicists from Kiel University, they did a nice 3D image by their geophysical methods, and they said, we think the deepest is not where you have seen here, 30 meters. We think it is here, where is now the debris here of the excavators. Try here. I think it is 20 meters. And indeed, it was 20.5 meters. So exactly, this was very good. So we know very well about this harbor basin. Unfortunately, not yet a shipwreck has been found. This is really, and the ship sheds are also still debatable, but they should be there. Okay, now let's go to this harbor, because this is a very quite recent detection. So let's go to the so-called Umetepe harbor. I showed you this view already, and we had drilled here, and we had said many years ago, the water is deep enough, that's not the problem. And then indeed, Madame Bumke, Professor Bumke from Halle University, she excavated this harbor gate in 2011. And she had the luck of the excavator, because she found even the letter of the Roman Emperor Hadrian to the union of the Milesian ship owners in 131 AD. And he says, I grant the union of the ship owners the right, and so on. So they put this letter, of course, to the gate, so everybody knew, yes, they have the right to do a union, and so on. And it's everyone who could read, you know, that were not too many, but at least it was there. And this is why we know it is the harbor gate. So that's really, this is fortunate that she found this. And now the new thing were under Christoph Behrens was that he made a very nice and very thorough survey on this Umetepe, on the whole rock here. And of course, also the harbor is of interest. And this year in 2021, when I was there with my assistant, we agreed that I should do some drills here in order to see whether this, what they interpreted as a pier, you know, as a pier from the geophysical data or image, is it really a pier, yes or no? So we drilled here, you see where the sticks are, and we drilled there at all the points. I only show you one result. And this is indeed, yes, this drill shows us nicely. Here we have the bedrock. This is the limestone, the bedrock here up to here. And then on top comes, what you can consider as the construction of the pier. You have tiles and so on. And this is the substructure, so to speak, of it. So we can confirm from the drilling result, yes, we can confirm. And the important thing is we can find it. But excavating would be difficult, because the water table is at, if I remember properly, at 1.50 meters or so. So that would not be too easy, even in September. We were there in September, middle of September. So where water table is normally quite low, but it always depends if they irrigate the fields or so, So it would not be too easy to excavate it, but we can prove it from the drills which did, yes, we confirm this should be the pier. So we have this scenario as a synopsis now from the progradation of the delta from 1500 BC up to present day. This is how it should look like at that time. Hybanda 1500 BC. Hybanda is still an island, as you can see, and of course the later region of Buffa is of course also accessible by ship if there were some. And then this is the time 800 BC. Praine is still well accessible, and also the other parts, but Hybanda is now being landlocked. We come to 300 BC. There it is difficult for Praine, but they have a harbor still. And then we come to the turn of the eras, like this. Now we see already that sediments are arriving here a bit. 300, now it is more endangered by the siltation. This Azap is already a lake there. This is Muse has the lake that people had to leave. We heard this by Pausanias. And then still a little excess, maybe the Milesian lake, as it was called, which is later Lake Buffa. And then, then it is more and more silting up. and the harbors are more or less useless. And then, of course, the present situation. Yeah, this that the landscape was having a major impact in Roman times is also confirmed, and late Greek times, Greek and Roman times, is also confirmed by drills which we did in Lake Baffa, close to here, not so far from Heraclea. We did 2 drills, or several drills, but 2 were important. And here is this drill number S6, Lake Baffa 6. And you see it's still a marine embayment. This was accompanied then also by palynological evidence, and much more important for us was the microfaunal evidence. So we have a marine embayment, a microfauna as well there. We have some varved layers, even what you see here. So varved would be, yeah, probably annual layers. And we have some anoxic situations. You see in the black here. This is not so nice for life there, so anoxic. And then you see a high sediment accumulation rate, SAR, but void of fauna. So no fauna is in it, but a lot of sediment from this here 200 BC up to about 250 AD. So you see a lot of sediment in that time. And this means, of course, that sediment has to come from somewhere, from Mount Latmos. It is washed here into this embayment, which is now turning more and more to a lake, lagoon-like lake. And then, we see the gradual separation, and Lake Baffa, which is still today, it is still brackish. And the deepest is about deepest point is about 20 meters or a little bit more. And this is where I asked the fish. There was still one fisherman at that time, and I asked him to show us where is the place which is the deepest, and he showed us, and we put our platform there. And this is from there that we have this sediment core. Another interesting aspect, which I was addressed to by Alexander Herder, I have to give credit to him. This is the interesting letter here. I will come to it in a minute. So the meander has, of course, river dynamics. Maiandros, this is nearly a tautology. Maiandros, alluvial deposition, delta growth, flooding, then the cutting off of one of the meander loops, and so on, changing the courses. So that's a problem for the ancient time also. When you have a strong precipitation and the river is high, then it may also take another course. So we have dead oxbows. Oxbows, that's interesting. This is the term in English, oxbow. Heracles is fighting the Achelos, and Achelos is compared with a boar with oxes. So he cuts off one horn. This is, of course, an oxbow. It's an oxbow. So a dead water from the Achelos River. So okay, here. So now the question, the legal and economic question: to whom does the new land belong? We have the delta growth, and always new land comes to it. Who can use the new land which is created by the river, by the delta progradation? To whom does it belong? And there we have the rescript of Emperor Justinian from AD 533. And the inscription was discovered at Didyma. And it was a dispute concerning the new land deposited by the Meander Delta. So the community of Justiniapolis, this is the former Didyma, now it was called, at that time it was called Justiniapolis, Emperor Justinian. So the community of Justiniapolis wanted to be exempt from paying taxes. They suggested a transfer of the charge to Miletos. The tax should be levied on alluvial land that had become recently cultivable and capable of being subject to tax. So they could, this new land of the river, it became cultivable, so it had to be desalinated. So after a while it's desalinated, so that you can have it as arable land. And now this is written here. We ask that this sum be levied on those locations that have been turned into land having previously been sea, and have now become subject to taxation and be assigned to the city of Miletos, and so relieve the citizens of Unianopolis of this entire burden. So they asked the emperor, please do not give us the land. We don't need it, so to speak, because we don't want to pay taxes. Be so kind and give it to Miletos. And for Miletos, it was a win-win situation. The Milesians pay the taxes easily, I would say, from the profit they make from the new alluvial land of the Meander Delta. So by agriculture and by fishing, the profit is much higher than the taxes. So that's very nice. To whom does the new land belong? The Milesian Peninsula in Greek-Roman times, this is how we know it. This is how we know it from the textbooks. And this is when we reconstructed in a virtual world, so to speak, Miletos imperial times, 1st, 2nd century AD. And in this image, which we have here, upper right, and also lower parts, we have to bring all the information together. We need to know from those who know about the buildings at that time. We need to know from the archaeologists, the ancient historians, how would the city look like? Are the insulae proper or not? They were not square, they were elongated as we know now, and so on and so forth. We have to put all the information into this. And we can say at that time there was still the sea, but there was now the Meander coming with his distributory arms. The delta was not far away and so on. So this is actually what I think is important, that we bring all the information together, and to our knowledge, to our best knowledge, this is how it looked like at that time. And we would say here, the Hume Tepe Harbor, I was just talking about, you know, this Lion Harbor, of course, and the Theatre Harbor and so on. So from that, we can deduce then other things. And it is the service to society, because when you present this like this in a museum or to students, to school classes and so on, then their mind starts to think and to see it in the landscape. So now I stop sharing my screen, and now Hans comes into the picture. Survey on the peninsula of Miletos, an update, and if there is time, I can still make an epilogue, but later. More important is now that Hans can share his screen.
Yeah, Helmut, thank you very much. Well, welcome everybody again, and thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting. My special thanks, of course, go to Helmut, with whom I had the best cooperation ever. And I remember the time as really wonderful and very, very productive. And as you have seen from this presentation. And I'm also very happy that he already explained so much about the history of Miletos. This makes it for me easier to restrict myself on the results of the survey. First of all, I wish to explain that term peninsula of Miletos is used in two ways. Helmut has used it mostly to design the town and which protrudes into the former Gulf of Latvian Gulf. I use the term peninsula of Miletos to design the overall from Miletos down to Didyma and to the Gulf of Akbük. This is what is called the ancient, was called the ancient Basilicosinus by the ancient historians. The peninsula of Miletos between the Latvian Gulf in the north and the Gulf of Akbük in the south covers about 300 square kilometers. It is called Milesia or Milesia G by the ancient historians. It is not identical with the entire polis territory of Miletos, which underwent several changes and to which not only the islands Lepsia, Leros, and Patmos belong, but since the end of the 5th century, beginning of the 4th century, also Thebai at the Maikali mountain ridge north of the Latvian Gulf. Theodor Wiegand, the first excavator of Miletos, planned to include the Milesian Peninsula in the exploration of Miletos, and in 1902 he commissioned Paul Wilski to make a map of the Milesian Peninsula, which became the best archaeological map for the time. And you see here a small slip of it. Because the overall map would be too large for the presentation. And in the 1980s, Walter Vogtländer surveyed the area around Akbük that was populated by Carians. This is in the south. His mystifying interpretations of the archaeological findings do not invalidate their careful documentation. As part of a major project of the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, I then systematically researched the entire Milesian Peninsula between 1990 and 1999. In 1993, we discovered the sanctuary of Athena Assesia in Assesos. In 1994, we successfully proved its destruction by the Lydian king Alyattes in 608 BC, as testified by Herodotus. Despite such promising results, we were unfortunately not allowed to continue this excavation. Here you see Miletos, and Assesos is east or south, a little bit southeast of Miletos. This inscription is a fragment of a votive to Athena. Yeah, as you see here, and these are the debris of the destruction of Alyattes, from which George Calais-Zoglu reconstructed more than 160 vases of the late 7th century. And we owe to him also the new datation of this destruction, which was formerly dated to 606, but he changed the date to 608. And here on this high plateau, the sanctuary was situated. And meanwhile, unfortunately, the site has been destroyed by looters, and precious objects like this unique fiale with a dedication to Athena Assesia have found their way through the market into the Museum of Antiquities in Basel, Switzerland, and the museum unfortunately refuses to return this apparently recently stolen object to the Turkish authority. During the project of our survey, which produced 626 archaeological sites, has so far been reported in 16 preliminary reports and essays. There are also 3 monographs and the unpublished habilitation thesis by George Calais-Zoglu on the Milesia in prehistoric times. In addition, there are numerous important works on geoarchaeology and quaternary morphology by Helmut, as he has just shown. His work is really impressive. And my last detailed summary of the results in the volume Cora and Polis, edited by Frank Kolb in 2004, is out of date in some points, which I would therefore like to emphasize here. Well, I show you only a small clip of our new map of the Milesian Peninsula, new archaeological map of the Milesian Peninsula, because the original map in the scale of 1 to 50,000 measures 1 to 1 meter. You wouldn't see only little red dots, yeah, if I would show here the whole map. But of course, we have different symbols for different kinds of sites, and Miletos itself is here represented, and you see the density of the sites is enormous. 626 sites on 300 square kilometers. This is 2 sites per square kilometer. This is quite a lot. With regard to the fact that most of this land is agriculturally used in use, yeah, and it's farmed, and so many more sites have been there, but have, of course, over time have been destroyed. Yeah. Because Didymar in the south, which you cannot see on the map here, Didymar in the south of the Milesian Peninsula, sorry. Also here I show you first this map of the historical topography. We have some new results, of course. Assessors is one finding, there are others. In addition to the city of Miletos, the Milesia comprise several small towns and village settlements. For instance, Argaza on the Gulf of Akbük, the Basilikos Kolpos. Assessors with the sanctuary of Athena Assesia in the northeast of the Mengerep. This is the Mengerep here, and Assessors is here. Teichusa in the south, yeah, nowadays Sapleadda, and Didymar with the famous oracle shrine near today's Altincum and the port of Panormos, today's Mavishi here. Because Miletos sets the cult rules for the important oracle sanctuary of Didymar, it was, contrary to the claims of Klaus Tuchel, part of Miletos, at least since archaic times, and was connected to Miletos by a sacred road, which of course was not only built for the purpose of procession and religious purpose, but this road, of course, had also an large military and economic importance. According to Strabo, the ancient geographer Strabo, the Milesia ended at the Poseidon, the altar of Poseidon at Cape Monodendri, which suffered vastly from the substantial subsidence of the coast, as you can easily see here from the picture. It's a ramp which led to the altar over which the bulls which were sacrificed to Poseidon here, this ramp now leads directly into the sea. Yeah, so the sea level rise in relation to the land is really considerable here. Yeah, the statement of Strabo that here at this point ends the Milesia is not fully correct. In fact, the Milesia ended further east at Teichusa, nowadays Sapleadda, here at this point. At the east end of this Basilikos Kolpos, the Gulf of Akbük. Therefore, Louis Robert's identification, here you see it in more detail. This is the peninsula of Sapleadda, which in antiquity has been much larger. Here also we have a strong subsidence of the coast, and the Teichusa, as the name already says, was fortified, a little fortified town, but the walls which Vogtländer claim to be fortification walls are none. And here you see very clearly it's a coast. Here you see house walls, yeah, transported by the sea, and they turn up and vanish because the process of transgression is going on. Yeah, it does not stop. And with the warming up of the global warming up, it will even become more stronger. Yeah, because we have to localize Tayhusa here at this point, is a identification of the fortress of Doanbeleni on the peninsula of Kazakli with Tayhusa was proven wrong, and but it is still followed by some French and Italian colleagues. Unfortunately, in the humanities, there is some, yeah, I don't know, people always claim lifelong learning, but if it comes to the point, they refuse. Yeah, if there are new evidence, they don't accept it. Well, the peninsula of Kazakli was surveyed by me in 2000. It did not belong to Miletos, but to Iasos, the next polis south of Miletos. Furthermore, from my systematic survey of the Maikali mountain ridge, which I made between 2000 and 2009, it became clear that the small fortified settlement of Sibai in the western part of Maikali did not come into existence before the end of the 5th and beginning of the 4th century BC as a deme of Miletos, a village of Miletos. From this, it follows that the Milesian demes, Argaseis, Katapolitai, Lerioi, Plataies, and Tichieseis, are also originally formed settlement units, while only during the imperial era they functioned as electoral districts for the election of the prophet in Didyma. But this was not their original function. Originally, they were simply territorial unities of Miletos. As Helmut has already explained, the oldest traces of human activities on the Milesian Peninsula date back to the late Chalcolithic era. Settlements there started later, that on Mount Latmos, where we have these wonderful cave pictures. Yeah, today's Latmos today is a Turkish Beşparmak. However, prehistoric sites are rare, and they are often located on the coast or on small offshore islands or peninsulae. The large early Bronze Age Pittos necropolis of the Renkuyu makes an exception from this rule. Yeah, this is here a hill with a soft slope, and people planted new olive trees here, and while digging up the holes for the olive trees, they brought up many fragments of early Bronze Age pithoi, and we know that this is a very typical type of grave in the early Bronze Age. We find there are other pithos necropolis also on the peninsula of Bodrum Halikarnassos, yeah, for instance. This necropolis makes an exception from the rule that these prehistoric sites mostly lie on the coast, but unfortunately we never were able to examine this necropolis more closely. The presence of Minoans and Mycenaeans, which is very clear in Miletos itself, is not so well attested in the peninsula. Only on Tafshan Adase, I don't show a picture of it. Tafshan Adase is a small island which has been also in until historical times, a peninsula. This Tafshan Adase is near Mavishi, near Panormos, and it has been excavated now by François Berthemes of the University of Halle, and it is the presence of Minoans can be attested there too. The Mycenaeans never colonized the hinterland of Miletos. Yeah? That's evident from the survey. Yeah. Finds of proto-geometric pottery are also limited to Miletos itself, but are unstratified. So far, no proto-geometric architecture has ever been found. For the archaic period, Helmut has already explained that the archaic period was a heyday of Miletos, especially the second half of the 6th century BC. And for the archaic period, a 4-stage settlement structure can be demonstrated for the Milesia, which, in addition to the metropolis of Miletos, included urban sub-centers such as Assesos, for instance, Pyrrha and Teichusa, as well as village settlements such as Argaza and numerous individual farmsteads, which are also attested by Herodotus. Only the southern coast of the Latvian Gulf was densely populated at that time. The waterless Milesian plateau was not yet. It is not, as some believe, identical with the Milesia Hyperacria that the Persians handed over to the Carians of Pidasa on Mount Grion after the destruction of Miletos in 494 BC. It is evident that Miletos already in the archaic period started to expand into eastern regions. Yeah, and that's the Milesia Hyperacria, not the plateau, the Stefania plateau over Miletos. Thanks to this diversified settlement structure and its extensive chora, its extensive hinterland, Miletos recovered quite quickly from its destruction by the Persians. And I've just published a paper on this topic. The point in time at which Miletos was fortified again after the destruction by the Persians is still a matter of dispute. Assesos was fortified in the late 5th century, yeah, as I just said, in 1993, we had the occasion to make some trial trenches at Assesos. Here we found the sanctuary of Athena, and here we found remains of city wall, with towers, and we were able to make at least one trench here at Tower C, and the tower has in English, he has these Lotkanten. In English, it is don't know.
Was suchst du?
Das Wort für Lotkante. In Angoli ribassati in Italiano. In French, it's feuille d'angle. In English, it's, I don't know. That doesn't matter. This, we know that this way to treat the corners of a tower does not start before the second half of the 5th century. So it is clear that assessors, and from the pottery, it is evident that this city wall here of Assessos was built in the late 5th century, maybe last quarter of the 5th. Yeah. So and maybe this is the same time at which also Miletos itself was again fortified. Yeah, and due to the lack of excavations, the date of the fortifications of Teichusa Sapla-Adase is unclear. Walls claimed by Walter Vogtländer as defensive walls were none and have now disappeared due to the ongoing marine transgression of the western coast of Turkey. In the Hellenistic period, there was brought about a social and demographic shift. Teichusa is deserted, Miletos blossoms again, the settlement around Didyma grows. Only now, at the end of the 4th, beginning of the 3rd century BC, the waterless Milesian plateau is cultivated as a result of strong pressure on resources. Numerous large farmsteads are built there. Large cisterns ensured survival, as like the one you see here in the picture. The high investments required testify that not impoverished smallholders moved to this marginal land, but rather well-to-do people who could afford the money for these investments. And so the highland of Miletos is the plateau, the Stephania plateau, as we are used to call it, is totally waterless. And so you can make your living there only if you build huge cisterns, which help you to come over overcome the months, the summer months without any drop of rain. And here you see in this large cistern, we have an archaeological finding which is very typical for many of these farmsteads there, because we can very clearly discern 2 phases of construction. An older one here, where the small stones are completely bedded into mortar, and a younger phase, where the mortar is only smeared into the joints between the large stones. And this is clearly early Byzantine. Yeah, and in between there is nothing. We have no evidence for Roman. For the Roman imperial time. These farmsteads are classical to Hellenistic, and then many of them are reoccupied in the early Byzantine period, and many new ones are built also in the early Byzantine period. What is also most interesting, that impressive monumental graves make clear that during the classical and Hellenistic period, the landlords resided on their estates and not as absentee landlords in the city, as has sometimes been claimed by some modern historians. Another, here I show you pastoral sites in the Milesia, simple wall squares, which testify to a highly developed pasture economy. Milesian wool has been famous since archaic times. Yeah, and these are not farmsteads. These are simple quadrangular the wall squares, yeah, without we don't find much, won't find much pottery inside, and there were no. This is not a living quarter, yeah. It's evidently, and they are always in regions where farming would be difficult, but you can use this area for pasture. And from these classical to Hellenistic pastoral sites, the archaic compounds in the Carian populated region of Akbük and beyond stands out. They were residences of Carian shepherd clans with whom the Greek population was in close economic exchange, because in these are more in hilly regions, and where you can't do agriculture, it's impossible. These regions can be only for pasture. And but you find nice Greek pottery in these compounds, and so it is evident that the Carians, these shepherds, were in close exchange with the Greek population. The Greeks were growing grain and things like that, and the Carians were growing sheep, and so they could. This was a good base for exchange. While in the Hellenistic period, the territory of Miletus expanded considerably eastwards by integrating, mostly by so-called Sympolitei, other formerly independent poleis like Pyrrha, Myus, Heracleion, Latmos, and Pidasa on Grion. It followed a decline in late Hellenism and in the imperial era. Also in the 1st to 2nd century AD, widely ramified water supply network supplied Miletus. Settlements of the imperial age are rare in the Milesia. Here is a special map with displaying all the sites which belong to the water supply network. There was a main channel leading from Asessos down to the town, but on its way there were every single spring was walled, and the water was led into the main channel. Yeah, and this is, for instance, here 432. You can see it here, and here is the source and the spring, and all these springs have separate channels which led to the main channel, and the whole system was used until Byzantine times. Yeah? And so if they took all the water available, if they brought all the water available to Miletus, there's nothing left for the people living in the countryside. So we wonder, how did Miletus in the imperial age supplied its large population? There must have been somewhere some very large estates, most probably in the Maiandros plain, and so we can't find them. Yeah, but this, of course, is a hypothesis. Yeah, yeah, this is a. And this water system is really fantastic. The next parallel is Isernia in Italy. It's a kind of canal system, yeah. And you can walk in these channels. They are more than 2 meters high. Yeah. Well, so much for that. And the Milesia only experienced a new heyday in the early Byzantine period. The types of settlement include, in addition to the metropolis of Miletus, individual farmsteads from modest small farms to large estates, monasteries, as well as villages and small towns. a completely preserved inscription of Emperor Justinian found in 1991 in Didyma, covering in second or third use a wastewater channel, mentions a formerly unknown town named Justinianopolis on the Milesian Peninsula. Helmut has just talked about it. Dennis Fessel, who published the inscription, claimed on the basis of its find spot that Didyma was renamed Justinianopolis in the time of Justinian. However, Louis Robert has clearly shown that Didyma was always called Tohieron in Byzantine times. This later became Turkish Yeronda. It is crucial for this question that the place which now receives the imperial privilege of being allowed to call itself Justinianopolis and is freed from the taxes, appears in the inscription as the old Komi, the old village. For me, and I sincerely do hope also for this auditory, it is completely unacceptable that the highly significant oracle site of Didyma, which evidently continued to oracle happily even after the edict of Theodosius of 439, appears in this inscription as the old Komi, the old village. Justinianopolis can be identified with a large deserted settlement on the Gulf of Akbük, covering 28 hectares, 2.8 square kilometers, which, among other things, had a large three-aisled basilica, probably a bishop's church here. Yeah. The Milesian plateau being deforested and cultivated to an extent previously unknown in the 6th century, in the Justinian era. This is evidenced by endless stone walls and piles that form the boundaries of numerous country estates. We mapped, here you see it, and we found out that these cairns or these heaps of stones are frequently mixed with pottery, with fragments of ceramics. This has startled the archaeologists since the 19th century and since the first exploration of the Milesian Peninsula by Wiegand and later by others, Cook, Dubin and Cook and so on. They always wondered if these heaps were the remains of looted tombs or whatever. But the pottery is of different eras. If you have such a heap of stone with pottery of one era only, then you can be rather safe. It is you can be rather sure that this is a destroyed tomb. But if you have mixed pottery for different periods, so what is it? And the great discovery was that these are the remains of sieving. In landscapes, in karstic landscapes, earth is very precious. And people, even today, here is a modern sieve, even today people are sieving, or until recently, people were sieving the earth in order to get good earth for agriculture and get out the stones, and with the stones also the pottery, which was on the fields. The ancient pottery came to the fields by manuring, and this has been clearly shown by John Bindleff in his work. And the broken pottery was thrown on the kopros, afterwards, the kopros, the dung of the animals, was brought to the fields for manuring, and together with this dung, also the broken pottery came to the fields. Yeah? And of course, if the fields have been used over centuries, you have on the fields, you have pottery of different centuries. We mapped we mapped these field walls and found out that almost to every of these quadrangular or rectangular fields belongs a farmstead. When here, for instance, the black quadrangular means farmstead. This is a church. Yeah, so this belongs to the early Byzantine period. With the early Byzantine, very small, of course. It's these churches are more chapels, we would say, small churches. Sometimes also tombs, like here, and of course many cisterns. Yeah, the hypothesis of Barbara and Gregor Borg that all these walls and stone heaps are the relicts of extensive quarrying activities has, I wish to firmly reject this hypothesis, yeah, in the light of this map here. The approximately 100 large farmsteads predominantly operated an intensive export-oriented oil production. In almost every of these farmsteads, oil mills and oil presses were found. Some of huge dimensions. These stones are very typical. It's a new invention of, let us say, late antiquity. Yeah? And it works with a screw. Yeah, sometimes you can read in ancient times the screw was unknown. That's bullshit. The screw was well known, and we have even a press found in Herculaneum, which was destroyed by the Vesuv in 79. So already in the 1st century AD, the screw was known, and it was mostly, as far as we can see, it was mostly used for oil presses. So there was today these highlands of Miletus are barren and inhospitable, and this is a man-made environmental destruction. It comes from the Byzantine, from the periods of destruction after the 6th century. In this connection, I have to talk about this market gate of Miletus. It's very famous. It's in Berlin today. Wieland brought it there. It dates to the 2nd century, and in late antiquity, it was integrated into a city wall. And there is an inscription of Emperor Justinian of 538. For quite a time, people believe that this inscription dates the reuse of this market gate as a town gate in this late antique wall. And it is only in 2009 that the supposed Justinian wall was proved significantly younger, and that the Justinian inscription from 538 AD is secondary to this wall. This solves an old problem, because for a long time it has been believed that there was a dramatic reduction of the urban area of Miletus as early as the Justinian period, thereby creating a significant discrepancy between a flourishing landscape, as I have shown you, and an urban decline. Miletus was regarded as a prime example for the decline of the urban system in this epoch. And now we see this happened much later. This last ancient reblooming of Miletus and its countryside in the Justinian era in the 6th century AD ended abruptly around the middle of the 7th century. In 653 AD, the Caliph Muawiyah destroyed the town of Ephesus north of Miletus. However, it is nowhere attested that Miletus was destroyed either. The famous Justinian plague could also be responsible for the depopulation of Miletus and the Milesia, the impact of which, however, especially on rural areas, is highly controversial. It remains, therefore, unclear for what reasons the flourishing landscape of the 6th century AD was given up in the middle of the 7th. In the 7th and 8th centuries AD, the Persians attacked the coast of Western Asia Minor, followed by a series of raids by Arab pirates. This apparently led to a depopulation of the countryside and to the construction of a new fortification at Miletus, thereby abandoning large parts of the city. The countryside of the Middle Byzantine period from the 8th to the 10th century AD is completely in the dark. Towers, or as donjons or keeps, you see here 4 examples, were erected in the 11th and to 13th centuries AD, which have long been misinterpreted as part of a national signaling and defense system. They are not. These are the towers of the farmsteads with tower of large Byzantine landholders. They end abruptly with the Turkish conquest, which left no directly observable traces on the ground. While Miletus, the former ornament of Ionia, ends up as a small Byzantine castle on the top of the theater. I take this as a warning to our own civilization. Thank you very much.
The epilogue is, I go in order to explain a little bit of this landscape change due to the delta. I go to Troy now, and then I come back to Miletus because I want to show you this metamorphosis, the geomorphological metamorphosis, which we can trace in also the other deltas. So this is the famous example of Troy by Ilhan Kayan and Chris Kraft. I come to it in a minute. And it's the marine embayment also when the sea level rose high. I told you when the sea level rose high about 6,000 years ago, we had the creation of many embayments, many marine inlets and new islands. As I said, this is the birth of the islands. And later comes then, of course, the delta progradation. And in this case, it's the Karamendres or the Scamander. And from the side comes the Dümrek or the Simois in ancient times. And then you see how the progradation of the delta is. And what I want to explain here is the geomorphological metamorphosis. Yeah? From a Rhea coast, this is when it is all marine, to a Birdsfoot Delta with distributary arms. This is typical of a Birdsfoot Delta, and I come to the example in a minute, and then a truncated delta in this case. Yeah, so a Rhea coast is like you would find today in Galicia in northeastern Spain, where the river mouths are drained. The river mouth evolved in glacial times. You had a lot of rivers going down, and now comes the sea level high. And since these rivers there in Galicia are not strong enough to build out deltas, and since the swell and the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, it's directly exposed to it, it's still today, it's a Rhea coast with the drowned lower parts of the valleys. Galicia is an excellent example for that. And then a Birdsfoot Delta, the best example is the Mississippi Delta. What is important for that? You have a strong river, you have a lot of sediment, and so the river can build out distributary arms. Why arms, plural? Because it is typical of a delta that you have bifurcation, that the sills are so low that when with a high water, then comes another direction of the delta lobe and another one. And also from Mississippi, we know very well which lobe, delta lobe, evolved when, since 6,000 years. It's also the case here. And what is important for a Birdsfoot Delta is that you have hardly any tides. If there are strong tides like Amazon River, it's a totally different type of a delta. But here, no tides in the Gulf of Mexico, and similar in the Mediterranean, no tides or hardly any tides. So the delta can evolve as a Birdsfoot Delta, as you see it here. But then it can be that the coastal current becomes strong. And in this case, this is indeed the Maiandros today. And because we have the strong coastal current from the Black Sea to the Aegean Sea, and you see it when you look closely at the coast and you look at the suspension going out, and it is drifted to the left, as you see, to the west, because we have the strong coastal current, then the fingers of the delta are, so to speak, cut off. They are truncated because the coastal current is stronger than the river input into the sea. So we would call this a metamorphosis, a geomorphological metamorphosis of the landscape, and in this case of the deltas. Metamorphosis from Rhea coast via Birdsfoot Delta to a truncated coast, as we can see it with the Maiandros today. So we had the Rhea coast, both for Ephesus and for Miletos. So we had these embayments, these inlets going far inland. In the case of Miletos, we think Schroeder thinks at Bilal Bay, they think it is even nearly 60 kilometers inland. Maybe it's too much, but let's say it is 50 or 40. It's quite considerably inland. In the case of Ephesus, we said it is at least 20 kilometers. We could prove that, okay, up to Bellevue, and in this case, maybe close to Aydin. And this is the Rhea coast, and then comes the progradation of the delta, as I have shown to you. And then still today, we have, with the Büyük Mender, the Maiandros, we have a Birdsfoot Delta, as we see today, because we see distributary arms in this picture, at least two, which go on both sides of the former island of Lade. Yeah, you remember the naval battle of Lade, 494, the Persians win against the Milesians and their allies, as you see. So they are the distributary arms. They even prograde quite far into the sea, into the Aegean Sea today. Today, we have to say there is erosion because it is the deltas are starving. It's not enough sediment going into the sea, and the sea level rises, continues to rise. And when you look at this landscape, now you drive, for instance, from Miletos to Didyma, there's a nice spot where everybody stops and has a look on the delta, and you see the strong erosion which is taking place. So it is a transgression of the sea again, and the river cannot compensate anymore. So we only, in the case of Miletos and the Büyük Mender, we only have the transformation, the metamorphosis from Rhea coast to Birdsfoot Delta. But in the case of Ephesus, I had shown you last time, we have the Rhea coast up to Bellevue. Then we have the Birdsfoot Delta. Here you see it when it was inside the embayment still. But then you see already here, when beach ridges form, they form because the progradation, the coastal current is strong, and it is stronger, so it cuts off these distributary arms. So it starts, let's say, after the late Byzantine times starts, that the coastal current takes over, and so we have a truncated coast. The metamorphosis from Rhea coast via Birdsfoot Delta to a truncated coast, delta coast, as you can see. When I come back to the example of Troy, just one slide or two slides I want to show you, because it is a nice story which Chris Kraft made, and it is published, highly ranked in Geology 2003, where he says, yeah, we can put, so to speak, the narration which we know from the Iliad, we can transform this into the landscape. So we can see, if we read the Iliad on the one side, and we know now where is Troy, and we read and we do our reconstructions, then we can see, in the Iliad, this may be where the Greek ship camp was, And this may be where the fort was in the Iliad. So we can give it a meaning in the landscape because of reconstruction of many drills and so on, which he did. And he nicely narrates that, and this is a nice statement for geoarchaeology. He says in this geology paper, and geology is one of the highest ranked geological journals, he says, only a classicist, so a classicist like Anka and others, only a classicist can translate and interpret correctly the nuances of ancient Greek literature. Yet it takes a sedimentologist, geomorphologist, to correlate the scholarship of the classicist with the geologic data and develop reasonably precise ancient landscapes. Now, this is a very nice statement, and it really says that both has to come together. The interpretation of the Greek literature, of the sources, of the ancient sources, and then our evidence from drill cores. And I want to give tribute to Chris Kraft. That is him. Yeah, he was, I could consider a mentor in a way, or a good friend of mine. He died January last year, the Nestor of geoarchaeology, if you like. And here he is studying sediments from Troy, in fact, from Troy in July 1977. Yeah, it is really a wonderful, wonderful picture. He gave us the ideas, and he has 2 science publications on Troy, science publications. So that's the highest you can do. Okay, and this is us, you know, this is Chris Kraft together with Ilhan Kayan, who also worked a lot. He comes from Ege University, and myself, yeah, I have to say 26 years earlier. So we all became older, but it was really nice. And we sat together with him. In this case, it's in Ephesus, in a pension, and he was always taking this table and we were discussing. You see the ancient, yeah, you see already one of the reconstructions here of the Büyük Menders, the Kaistros, and we discussed where to drill and how to put it all, the pieces of the puzzle, how to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Yeah, so when I use an outlook now, where do I think science can go, or what are topics which are interesting from the side of geomorphology, or also from the side of geoarchaeology? I think it is important to do archaeoprognosis and predictive modeling. That is to say, when we have a good GIS with all the information from all geology up to ancient history and so on, all the GIS, and we put it together, then we can say which are the spots which are best to do research on. We cannot do research overall. Even also in Milesia, it is difficult. It's a lot of stuff, and Hans has shown you a lot of survey and what he has done, excellently done. And now, where are the hotspots? Where are still the missing points where we would, and this is well done in a GIS, and then you can say archaeoprognosis. These areas, in this case now, doesn't matter where it is, but this is prone where it is reddish here. Yeah, these are areas where we think we can find most of the stuff. If we go in the valley, no, it's too wet. People were not there, but here it is good. This is, of course, our perspective today. It may fail if we go back too much, because then the meander loops and the river change the course, but at least it's in good access. If you don't have too much money, which normally is the case, then it's a good access. Archaeoprognosis. This is the hot topics, the hot spots, so to speak, the hot areas where to do research, where to study. And then I think still harbors are excellent archives. You know, we talk about the life cycle of a harbor even. I think the term comes from Nick Mariner and Christophe Morange, but I like it. A harbor is installed and then it lives and then it's silted up. And I've shown you last time this harbor of Ephesus, and we could talk about the harbor of Lion Harbor and the 4 harbors we know in Strabo's time of Miletos. So they are excellent archives, and for geological, for biological, for archaeological, a shipwreck would of course be wonderful, like in the Theodosian harbor of Yenikape of Istanbul. Yeah, that's an archive in many aspects, and we can do a lot with this archive. I think it's still a very, very hot topic. But it's of course difficult to excavate, like in the harbor of, in the case of Jenica. But this was possible because of they wanted to do the tunnel, but I don't know when or if ever the harbor of Ephesus, for instance, or the Lion Harbor will ever be excavated. As for the Lion Harbor, we know also the molds which are there. We know where they are, but if to excavate them is hardly impossible because of the high water table. And then I think what we always bear in mind a little bit, especially with the global warming, is the question climate impact and human impact. Do we have archives where we can also trace the climate impact? I'm always cautious because in these landscape which are which have such a long settlement history, normally the human footprint is stronger than the climate signal. This is my credo. This is what I see. But maybe if we go off, like we did last time at which was in the hinterland of Ephesus, in the Bellevue Lake, you may call it, then maybe we can detect the climate changes. And this is, of course, an interesting topic in our whole discussion about global warming. And we can say, all the audience, all of us, we can say, yeah, Herkunft ist Zukunft. So where we come from, the retrospective is needed for the prospective. Yeah, to look forward needs to first look backward. Where do we come from to know where we are going? So we have a good argument. And one hot topic is to look for natural risks after 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami. Everybody's looking for tsunami, but not only tsunami, but also strong, severe storms, storms, flooding. Where do we find these natural risks in our archives? I remember the day when Niemeyer showed me, this is the Minoan eruption, from 1630, as we know now. And it is in Miletos, it is half a centimeter or a centimeter ash, And I have shown you in the lake last time, Lake Bellevue, we have it also. So this would be a volcanic eruption. Where do we find the traces? Because this is an excellent marker horizon. There we know this is the time. But also, of course, tsunamis, destruction by tsunamis. We have excellent evidence, of course, from the Nile Delta. What they found because of the tsunami washed all the statues there into the lagoons. So this we should also look for at Miletos, this would be also a hot topic. And then the question, which was also addressed by Hans in his talk, the sea level rise, then it's drowning. We know the Tafsha Adase and the other Kölmir Adase, which Hans showed me from the Bronze Age. Now it's drowning. It will be lost. So we have to document it now as good as we can. It will be lost. It will be gone. So the influence of the sea level rise and tectonics, of course, we are in a setting which is highly tectonic. When you look at an earthquake map of the Mediterranean, the hottest is the Aegean Sea. It's all red all over. No earthquake in Sardinia and Corsica. This is stable, but Aegean Sea and Turkey, North Anatolian fault line and so on. This is prone to earthquakes. And finally, I think what is important for us also to create these virtual worlds, developing 4D scenarios, I say, it's also taking the time. It's our service to society. It's a service, it's a mission from universities, also the service to society and from all of us that we integrate the interested public in museums and educating students and school children and so on. And they can only be educated if we give them pictures like that. This is how it looked like in those times. So creating these virtual worlds will become more and more important. And with this, I end, and we both thank you very much for your attention, for listening for such a long time, and maybe there are some questions. Thank you very much.